My name is John Douglas. My co-host is Daniel Lowber. Welcome. This week on Black Mountain Radio, a show about social issues, pop culture.
The gays.
Yeah. This is a landmark day for marriage equality.
Correction, yesterday
was a landmark day for marriage equality in a 5-4 Supreme Court decision. The LGBT community now has full marriage rights under the federal law of the government. Justice Anthony Kennedy said, no union is more profound than marriage. It would misunderstand these men and women to say that they disrespect the idea of marriage. Their plea is that they do respect it so deeply that they seek to find its fulfillment for themselves. So now we have a federal level marriage equality rights. It's a long time coming.
It was a beautiful thing, man. Officiated a few gay weddings myself over the years. Shout out to the Universal Unitarian Life Church in Seattle for the free online registration as a minister.
Minister Lowber,
based in my home state of Washington, absolutely. So yeah, I'm technically Dr. Reverend Dr. Daniel Lowber, because I paid like $30 for these like fake certificates of like a doctorate of ministry, like a doctor of like metaphysics, and then like a certified reverend. So
I have my PhD from the University of the Philippines too. So you know
exactly,
you know how it goes.
It'll never get better than the Simpsons when they talked about Hollywood Upstairs Medical College. But I've got these framed fake degrees in my office at home because it always annoys me to go into like a lawyer's office or a doctor's office and to see like all these degrees, like look how important I am. So look at my fake degrees that cost me $30 and zero time to acquire, but they look official, and so people believe.
Well, that's like in Garden State when Zach Braff goes to the psychologist. He's got so many frames on the wall that they actually put the last couple on the ceiling, glued to the ceiling. I always love that.
I was like Garden State. Zach Braff gets too much internet blowback for his weak chin and douche beard, but I like Zach.
Yeah, it was a good movie, man.
Yeah, so my favorite part of the aftermath of the decision was you get some highly educated people, as usual, going on their favorite social media accounts and saying, oh, this is so terrible, the queers are taking over, I'm moving to Canada. Yeah. And then my favorite response was some Canadian person was like, well, gay marriage has been legal here for 10 years. So feel free to move here if you want, but it's been the same situation for a decade.
Right. Well, some statistics while you discussed, there is some dissent. Before the federal government legalized LGBT marriage rights, 37 states did have 72% did have legal gay marriage, including Massachusetts, California, Connecticut, Iowa, Vermont, et cetera, But there were several states that same-sex marriage was banned in their state constitution, including Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Michigan, Mississippi, Missouri, Nebraska, North Dakota, Ohio, South Dakota, Tennessee, and Texas. So
all of those very surprising, by the way.
Right.
They would be that conservative.
No big surprise there, but it's still, and like we talked about last week with racial inequality and racial tension and discrimination that still exists in the country. This is not a resounding thing. This is not something people agree on wholeheartedly. Like everything else in the country, there's divisiveness.
Yeah, well, tough shit. I mean, you always have to legislate progress at a certain point.
Sure.
It used to be legal to own people as property. They had to legislate that away.
Right.
It used to be illegal for people of different ethnicities to get married. They had to legislate that away. It used to be illegal for women to vote and own property. They had to legislate that away. So, yeah, there's always backlash against civil progress, but who gives a shit? It's like, what are they going to do about it? The Texas Attorney General wants to pop off and say, oh, Texas won't do this, Texas won't do that.
They're going to secede again.
Yeah, it's adorable that you want to posture for your base, and it's ultimately deeply cynical in a political way, because it was very interesting to me to see the reaction from some Republican cognoscenti on various social media platforms, where they're like, thank you so much, Supreme Court, because it takes one really divisive issue for conservative candidates for president off the table. All you have to say now is, I disagree with the decision, but it's not the law of the land. I have to respect it. You can't argue with that. It can't be used as a bone or a wedge issue on the campaign trail.
Sure.
So it's fascinating to me. I always want there to be something in real life like the House of Cards equivalent, where there's that one episode where they go like, we got to go to the king of polls, and you'll find this dude who's like really good at polling, and he can tell you basically how things actually break down, number wise, demographic wise, voting wise. I always wish there was some kind of equivalent to that in real life, because the perception out there is that, okay, you know, all these conservatives are against this, and really it's large, you know, percentages of their voting base are against it. But the leaders themselves all went to the same Ivy League schools. The conservatives were going to Yale and Princeton and Harvard, right along with the Democrats and the liberals.
Right.
They all belong to the same fucking secret societies. They all belong to this. They all go to the same country clubs. There's not a whole lot of difference among the elite of either political party. But in order to have the support of their base,
pandering to the base,
they gotta posture in certain things that they don't remotely believe themselves.
Sure.
You know, like a bunch of Russia's leadership has no problem with gay rights, but because Russia as a country, the Vox Populi is deeply homophobic, they have to represent their issues if they want to stay in power.
And the church, don't forget.
Russian Orthodox Church is the backbone of that society. So
absolutely.
It's fascinating to me that the people who actually are nominally in charge don't believe the stuff that they got elected on, but the only way to get elected is to posture that way. And it's sad, but at the same time, everybody who tends to kind of lead the charge for these progressive changes tends to get their head shot off. So I can understand the reluctance on the part of politicians to be out there waving the rainbow flag in the literal caucuses, because you'll probably get executed.
And
you know?
and it's not that what you said doesn't have any bearing on elections. What you just said in terms of taking that issue off the table. If you look at the 2004 elections, John Kerry, many people stipulate, lost by and large because of the fear-mongering that the Bush White House and the Bush campaign force spread with gay equality, gay marriage rights. That was a huge issue in 2004. And if that was off the table then, we might have a different situation in 2004, and then less conflict, less war. Who knows? Yeah,
it's interesting to me because there seems to be people, there do seem to be certain political strategists on both sides who take a supremely realpolitik view of how things operate. Like, okay, whether they believe in it or not, it's a wedge issue. And so the more of that shit you can get rid of, then the easier you can campaign on other stuff.
Right.
You know, Obama's dirty socialism, we got to get rid of that, put conservatives back in power. We got to, you know, change tax structure. We got to bolster the economy. My favorite part of the last couple of weeks was when that report came out that the Republicans commissioned that showed that if you get rid of subsidized healthcare, it adds like $110 billion to the deficit. And they ignored that and talked about how it would be beneficial to the economy somehow anyway.
Sure. And ignoring facts is an age-old tradition of the GOP.
Of politics in general, let's be honest. But
sure.
That baffles me that you can just do that and just go back stay on message, ignore the facts that you commissioned, and just continue hammering, okay, it's going to be good for the economy. Even though the numbers we paid for say that it's not. You know, I'm interested to see what the reaction will be when the slippery slope doesn't materialize, and now people don't start marrying their pets and their chairs and their cars and whatever else they do, or they prophesied would happen. And even then, who gives a shit? If some freak shut-in Iowa wants to marry his cat, I don't really care.
That's such a false equivocation, and that as a
even
human,
if it happens, who cares?
But just as a human being, that's so offensive to say that you marry another man, you're gonna marry your Japanese love pillow, or you're gonna marry your Dalmatian. You know, not only is that James Franco. Not only is that slippery slope, logical fallacy. I mean, that's fallacious.
It's a straw man argument.
It's a straw man argument, and it's offensive. It's so fundamentally offensive to compare someone's innate preternatural desires to pig fucking.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I think pig fucking would be a preternatural desire. That's not the best word choice there, but
yeah.
Can slide the chair back. I can't really see that. It's not an argument that the leadership makes because they believe it. It's because it's easy to whip up your base, rally support, get yourself elected, and then now let's get down to the business of actually running the country. Yeah. I just hate the entire process. And I think it was Thomas Jefferson who said democracy is the worst form of government yet invented, with the only caveat that it's better than anything else that we've come up with.
Winston Churchill.
Yeah. It's true. Like, it's just so maddening. But occasionally you get the breakthroughs. And it comes because sometimes nothing more than the will of the people.
Well, it's interesting. If you look at the history of Simón Bolívar, who was by and large, the great liberator of South America. He fought in his home of Venezuela against the Spanish occupying forces, but very much the same way that the rebel and Continental Congress fought against the British rule. I mean, there's a parallel there. But what Bolivar believed in was a strong central government, a president for life, if you will. So he felt that there was a balance between democracy and strong authoritarian central government. Because if states had the rights to make laws as they see fit, and if a revolving door of presidents came in, that there would be what there is now, which is pandering to your base, constant politicking, constant election cycles, which is the detritus of the capitalistic democratic political system, is just the constant running of elections now, which seems to be hyperbolic given 24-hour news cycles. And that was one of his paradoxical views, was he fought against, colonial rule in the Spanish, but he wanted to be the supreme leader, if you will, in a with Congress there and with a judiciary system. And I mean, I think there's something to be said about a strong central government, which, if you look at the Supreme Court, there are problems with the Supreme Court, but the justices are allowed to make decisions, as in the 5-4 ruling on marriage equality, without the worry of having to politic and I mean, I'm not naive. There's still politics involved with the judicial branch and the Supreme Court, especially with.
I took Anthony Kennedy siding with the 4 liberal justices. He's generally a right-leaning judge.
Right.
So, but I like that somebody who analyzed his decision said he likes to write in this lofty, for the history books kind of tone, and it's straight out of a screenplay. Like if they ever decide when they decide to dramatize this decision,
right?
I swear to God, going to lift verbatim his statement, because it's so sweeping and Sorkin-esque, and I loved it. It was like, "Thou shalt not hold these poor, betrothed or downtrodden masses from the sweeping annals of freedom and equality." And I'm surprised he didn't lapse into French or Spanish at some point to really make his point. But
Voltaire once said, "Oh no."
That's all the philosophy right there, kid. Save yourself some money if you're going to college. All you need to do is as Voltaire said, and just kind of trail off, and all the hipsters will want to feel like they know what you're talking about. So they're like, "Oh yes, absolutely,
totally." Yeah, I bought that book.
Well, and the problem with that kind of Bolivar-esque model is you really got to hope for a benevolent dictator.
Of course.
And we got one in this country in the form of FDR. I mean, the only, what was he, 4 terms?
4 terms, but
4-term president.
Finished his 4th term because
of polio or Jewishness or whatever fatal disease he had.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's the best case scenario. We get some autocratic, elitist, rich boy who just wants to make things better for everybody. That's not exactly the majority of the time.
Right.
Even if it starts off that way, as soon as Che gets in power, Fidel gets in power, let's kill everybody who helped me get there, because they know where all the bodies are buried because they helped bury them.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. So what I want, and thus shall it be, because that's how America works. The will of the white man is made manifest. I don't know if it should be 1 term or 2 terms, but I think for every single elected office in this country, from county fucking comptroller to president of the United States, it should be 1, maybe 2 terms. What say you?
And have it be 6 years. A 6-year 1-term presidency, similar. And I mean, there's multiple terms in Israel, but I believe it's a 6-year term. So instead of the exacerbated cycle of politicking that happens every 4 years, which seems to begin after the first 100 days, let's be honest, you have a 6-year term, which is nice, even in the middle of that 4- and 8-year single or double term. And yeah, there is no re-election. It's terminal. It finishes, and then you move on to do something else. And you have the right to not run again necessarily for president, but hold some other office in politics. What you have with presidents is 99% of presidents get out of office and write their memoirs and move on to something like some sort of token position, like
speaking engagements, consultancies. I'll go back and be a lawyer again, where I just, I'm on payroll for $400K at this law firm. I don't show up except at corporate functions to give it some shine.
The ambassador to Margaritaville, whatever.
Yeah.
Right. So you have a situation like this where you would have presidents who, Clinton, when he was elected, was 46, right?
Mm-hmm.
So at 52, when he's out of his 6-year term, he still has several decades, a couple decades of his life where he can be back in politics. So hopefully a system like that will encourage former presidents to engage in the political process in other ways and take.
Well, I want it to be for every elected office, and
right.
I want it to be
I'm just using it as an example.
I don't know if it'd be better to stagger it. Like, I'd like to see, okay, Senate elections happen here, and then 3 years later you have presidential elections. So there's always an overlap, because I think part of the problem comes with all these simultaneous elections, and it's just a clusterfuck for a while. People coming in with their ideals, running into the entrenched establishment, and then not being able to do anything.
Right.
Whereas if you had like a staggered term, people would have to cooperate. There'd be overlap, but somebody's last 3 years is somebody else's first 3 years. So
right. Like well, that's kind of like the midterm system now. The only problem that runs into is the rolling cycle of elections, and what people have shown that most midterm elections have at least a 25% drop off in people coming out to the polls.
Right,
so
but if those were the only elections, is what I'm saying. Scrap the current system. Like, all right, starting in 2020, we're going to have congressional elections. 3 years later, there's going to be a presidential election. Everybody gets the 1 6-year term, no matter the job.
Right.
You get 1 6-year term, go. So it require basically rewriting the rules and resetting the time table on a lot of this stuff. But I don't know if that'd be better, but it would hard for it to be worse.
I think the biggest problem right now is Congress and the fact that you have sinecure politicians who work their asses off to get elected and then either do nothing, do little, or do ill. And what I would want to see in this sort of reform system is Congress maybe a little bit longer, because you want to hope that a congressman who's been in for a couple terms has some wisdom, you know, over a congressman who has 3 days in office. So maybe like a 10-year term for Senate, maybe a 6-year term for the House of Representatives, and then that's it.
I think it should be equal, just because then you're not incentivized for or against any particular office.
Right.
Out of 10 years is too long, man. I mean, that's.
But if you look at the fact that the average age of a senator right now, I believe, is about 72.
Old, out of touch white people,
right,
by and large.
And most of them have been in power for at least 4 cycles. So
and what are they doing with it? Diddly shit.
Right.
So clearly that accumulated wisdom isn't doing dick.
Right. So, 10 years seems long, but at least it's less than 33 years of public office, where the last 25, nothing gets done.
Well, here's my point. I mean, I always love to cycle back to that Mencken quote of the only person fit to hold public office would never want the gig. You're making it so that the only person who wants to hold that job is there to actually do what they were elected to do.
Right.
And if you don't like it, tough shit. I can't get reelected. If you do like it, well, great, but I can't get reelected. So that would hopefully perpetuate, all right, this person did what I wanted. Let's elect somebody else who promises to continue that work. And if they fuck it up, then get somebody else in there.
Yeah.
You might have like locked in cycles in red or blue states then, where it's like, okay, just elect somebody who's against the queers over and over. But maybe not. I mean, we'll never find out unless we manage to change it, because I'm really tired of pandering to get elected and then just, okay, well, now we got to actually try and work with each other. I hate that. Let it be representative of what you were elected to do. So if you were elected to be a bigot, well, guess what? Now you got to be a bigot.
Sure.
Because you're only in office for 1 term. Or you can pander and then get in there and do whatever the fuck you want, because you can't get reelected. So there's no incentive for you to do anything but what you feel is right.
Well, then the flip side of that would be every politician would be a lame duck politician.
Mm-hmm.
So you have people doing even less because there's no incentive to be reelected.
Right, but the point is, the only people then going for the job, by and large, are the people who want to affect change for their constituents, for their base.
One would hope that.
Idealistically,
right.
I don't know if that's realistic, but it's just exhausting to see the current system, because it's like, okay, they fight against marriage equality for decades and decades, while in reality, the actual thinking political leaders like, God, can we get this off the table so we can stand a better chance of getting elected on shit that matters, that we all have genuine disagreements about? Because at this point, everybody's got a gay relative, a gay friend, a gay family member, a gay coworker, something like this.
And I think everyone always did, but now,
well, it's open. There's a lot more closeting.
Exactly.
You've got a prior.
Right. You've got a climate only in the last 5, 10, 20, 30 years where people feel comfortable to be an openly gay, transgender, lesbian, transsexual person.
Well, it's maybe 5, 10 years. I mean, Matthew Shepard was lynched in 1998.
Right.
That's only 17 years ago. And so to see the explosion the last couple of years of pushing for transgender equality and transgender rights. I mean, that's unthinkable in 2004.
Right.
2005, 2010 and on, it's starting to get a little momentum. The last year or two, it's gotten, a really big momentum. And that doesn't happen because of politics. That happens because of society.
Right.
So, politics being a function and kind of a warped extension of society, but generally always behind the times, because it's grandpa and grandma running the country,
right,
as opposed to the young people who are actually, and the middle-aged people who are actually doing things. Elderly people generally don't contribute much as a ongoing concern. They've already done their part in their time, and now they're just like coasting until the clock stops. And so when those are the people who get elected and have been in power forever, like what's their, I don't know, man. I've always said I'm not smart enough to really know the solution, but being just bright enough to see the problems is maddening. So how do we make it better?
Yeah. And, looking at possibly smaller systems of government, breaking it down into, even smaller local government having more power might be a possible option. One of the facts that when I was looking at the marriage equality argument and statistics, the following Indian and Native American tribal councils had already, prior to 2008, most of them, some of them as of 2013 and 2014, approved marriage equality. From the Coquille, and you're from the Pacific Northwest, does that sound right? Coquille Indian, the Mashantucket, Pequot, Suquamish, Confederated Tribes of Colville Reservation, etc. There are over 10 tribes that had already approved marriage equality, along with several other states. And you've got a smaller, tighter knit group of people, and what happens in someone's community directly affects them. And I feel like maybe if the shareholders of that community had more of a voice, if we somehow, a straight democracy where everyone votes on every issue, that doesn't work. 330 million people, it's impossible.
Yeah,
right.
You can have town hall meetings. You can't have a national town hall meeting.
But if we imbue a greater sense of civic responsibility somehow into things on a city level, on a community level, maybe that's a way to get people involved in the process and put more in the hands of local stakeholders, so government doesn't necessarily seem like this emerald city where someone's sitting behind a curtain making decisions that we have nothing to do with, nor do we have the ability to affect.
Yeah, when I was like seeing those demographic maps of the states broken down, where the simple way to do it is like the state is blue, the state is red, because that's the ultimate percentage of the vote that carries. But you see when they're blended together and the actual demographics are broken down, everything is a certain shade of purple. It tends to be more like 52-48 across the board. There's very few places where it's like this was 80% conservative, this was 80% liberal. And so, yeah, it comes down to people being involved in their local communities and doing good for their neighbor because they know them, and so they've got stakes, they've got skin in the game, and it's a great day. Yesterday was a great day. It's a great time.
Absolutely,
it's to be celebrated for this weekend. But then beyond that, there's still no discriminatory protection for gay people. You can still be fired from an individual business, small private-owned business. Certain larger businesses that don't have the protections afforded, you can be discriminated against because of your sexual orientation, and tough shit. So that's the next step. It's still not there yet. It needs to get better.
Some other things that still aren't there. Along with that, there's no equal protection for LGBT communities, blood donations, and adoption. Those are still issues, along with what you said that still exist. Yeah. What on the flip side of that, just to let everyone know, what the full coverage does include Social Security and taxes. Now same-sex couples will be
death
treated
benefits.
Right. You've got inheritance, hospital visitation, divorce. Yay.
Yeah. That's the one thing that hasn't been addressed. I have maintained, when I used in my mediocre stand-up career, I used to joke about how once gay marriage is inevitably a law, I will be interested to see what those divorce rates are.
Sure.
Because at first, it'll be the people who've been together 10, 20, 30, 40 years, finally, wherever they are, being able to get hitched, and then like the young people behind it. But holy shit, man, some of my gay friends cycle through in love so fast it blows my mind. Like I'll be talking to my friend Rachel, and oh hey, what happened to Amy? Oh, she was like 3 months ago. Now it's on to Tina, and it's like you guys lived together, we're talking about getting married, and you've been together like 2 months. Like oh yeah, well that's So the way that I've seen among the modern current gay community is it just cycles so quickly from you get those old stereotypical jokes about like what does the lesbian bring on the second date? A moving truck. What does a gay man bring on the second date? What second date? And those things are offensive to some, but for everybody who's got a sense of humor, come on, they're hilarious because they're based in a pre-existing version of reality, as most stereotypes are. It's not saying it's the majority, it's not saying it's even most people, it's just saying that everybody knows that guy or that girl who just blows through their personal life like a hurricane. And I'm hopeful that it trends at least below the 50%.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be surprised if in like 2020, the most lucrative profession in the country is somebody focusing in same-sex divorces. It's already a $50 billion a year industry.
Yeah.
Once you had some interior decorators like going at it hammer and tongs over like the Degas like replica from the alcove and the mimeograph collection and the vinyl, like it's gonna get ugly, man.
Yeah, and speaking of keeping a sense of humor, I mean the funny thing about gay marriage equality rights, you've got, I'm sure, that one guy who promised his boyfriend for years, hey, if we just could, I swear, if we just could, I'd marry you in a second. Yeah. That guy's shit out of luck.
That guy, that girl, there's a lot of people sweating balls across the country. Though I do like too, because like Brangelina liked to maintain that they would wait for marriage equality to get hitched, and they didn't do that. And our friends,
we have friends,
Cagle and Phil. Shout out to Swampland in Florida. Dr. Cagle and Beardman Phil are actually now going to get married. They had their commitment ceremony 6.5 years ago, and they're like, not until everybody we know and love who's gay can get married across the line will we do it. And they stuck to it. Yeah. The real Brangelina, suck on that, Brad, and your duck-faced bride. Some people do stick to what they say.
Yeah, no, and I was reading that this morning, and yeah, absolutely, that's great. And the thing that just like you had supporters of civil rights in the 60s coming down from California and from New York and the North, coming and marching along, white, Hispanic, Latino, Asian Americans marching with the African American community. There is a robust community of straight people who are supporters, and you don't even have to go out of your way because you have friends, you have relatives, you have people who matter in your life who are gay. It's a part of life, and it's always been a part of my life. I mean, I remember growing up in New York in the 80s, and one of the earliest sad memories that I have, just like really powerful memories, was my sister Sue had a friend, and I didn't know why at the time, but he was 23, 24. He weighed maybe 90 pounds. His skin was yellow. I mean, I remember the hair in his face. It looked like it was going to fall out, just like if you brushed against it, it just looked so untethered to his face. And he was suffering from, full-blown HIV/AIDS. And we gave him our Monte Carlo. And I remember like going, oh, why are we giving this guy a car? Like, I didn't understand the whole situation, but in retrospect, I mean, that was one of the most tragic early events is one of my sister's just amazing friends. This guy was a great guy, suffering early and really having no money because he spent every cent he had getting into AZT trials, and he was banned from his family. His father excommunicated him because of his homosexuality, and my family, who for their ups and downs, good and bads. My father did have some playfully racist tendencies, but he was always a supporter of people regardless of their gender, their sexuality, and that was a lesson I learned really early on.
Why did you give him a car?
Because he had nothing. He had spent all his money, and he needed a car to get to his hospital where he was going. He did get into AZT trials, and he did survive a bit longer, but he did pass away, unfortunately. But yeah, he got our white 1981 Monte Carlo, which was, It wasn't
a land yacht.
Yeah, yeah. It wasn't a prize peach of a car to begin with, but it was
a very safe ride.
It was the only time, and my father was always giving things to people, and that's why when he passed away, I got nothing, because he was the most generous person.
But he had a very well attended funeral.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember speaking at the funeral, and there was several hundred people in our large church, which I have not stepped foot in a church probably since that day. But yeah, you know, and that was just a really early, powerful memory for me. And there never was, and again, you go into high school and you forget those things because there's that fear of homosexuality amongst teenage boys is so rampant. You know, oh, you're such a faggot, you know, that horrible, hateful word. And we've talked about it out of the context of homosexuality. Some people are faggots.
That's how we were raised.
Yeah.
It was never, I have never in my life directed that with malice or prejudice or directed it at all towards a person who is gay.
Right.
I grew up, it was just meant to denote weak.
Right.
And I get that and I understand that. And that's why I don't use the word anymore, that it's hurtful to people who are gay, because it was used in such a derogatory, generally preceding violence for so long that you can't use it. Sorry.
Yeah, faggot being a bundle of sticks that was thrown on a fire, and it was to...
And a fag being a single cigarette in Britain, and the swastika being a Hindu symbol piece. Sorry, once it's been co-opted to a certain point, you can know the historicity behind something. It doesn't matter. It doesn't give you carte blanche or any rights at all to use it if you're going to be contributing to the suffering of a oppressed group of people.
To that same point, the reason it was co-opted to be a pejorative term against homosexuals is because how often they were lit on fire in certain communities and in other ways lynched, tortured, abused, and beaten. And it goes down to this fundamental fear of sexuality that I think a lot of quote unquote heterosexual men have. And I mean, you know, doth protest too much. That sense of deep-rooted homophobia comes from a place, I think, of just insecurity. It's so important to be a virile, straight man in our culture that, God forbid, someone thinks you know you're a little bit different and you're gay. That is such an offense to different pockets of people across the country, across the world. I mean, let's not even talk about the fact that in several countries across the world right now, homosexuals, gay community members are killed to this day, tortured to death. You know, and so I am very proud and grateful to be in a country where we do have what happened yesterday, full equality.
And even then, I mean, the list that was published by like the Telegraph or the HuffPost or something was like we're number 18 on the list of countries to do it. So we're behind like Uruguay and Panama and Iceland and Norway. Like the fucking Scandinavian countries are always out in the forefront of everything. You would think, being like the origin of where Aryan and white supremacist people like to trace their origin to, you would think it's just a bastion of like cross burning. But no, it's like socialized medicine and equality for everybody regardless of sexual orientation. And they're just way ahead of the curve. They are the curve, essentially, on all this stuff. And like we like to trumpet ourselves and be like, oh yes, oh wait, we're number 18. Like we act like we were number 1. Canada did it a decade ago.
And I think that again, I'm just grateful that we're there now. And I think that speaks to the fact that something we discuss often. This country is, you know, at least 4 or 5 separate geographic regions, and we're at least 3 completely separate countries within this country. You know, you've got the West, you've got the South, and you've got the Northeast, right? There are different regions. The country looks different, right?
Different food, different
dialects, different beliefs, different views, different religions, different religiosity. And so I think that is the culprit for why so many things in social change and injustices continue to happen so much later than they should in a liberalized Western country, is because we do have that divisiveness. And it's been harnessed so effectively by politicians. It's been used to get elected, to pander to their base. It's easier to divide and conquer. It's easier to blame another group of people and to pander to your people. And an easy way to do that is to divide based on racial lines, sexuality, regions, finances. There's so many ways that politicians in the United States do it that it almost seems that there's nothing off the table in terms of what our politicians are willing to do to get elected, to stay elected, and to continue to be elected?
I don't know. I don't think there's a limit. It's what you can realistically get away with.
Scorched earth, man.
It's what you can get away with. I mean, General Sherman is revered in the North for the very same reason he's vilified in the South, which is, all right, these fuckers won't quit. I'm going to burn to the ground every square inch between me and the sea. And he did, and it worked.
Yeah.
So we're like, yay, Sherman. And everybody in the South is like, he burned everything that I knew and loved. So it's even within the same country, the same person can be a hero here and the world's biggest villain over there.
History is written by the winners, and you know, in the American Civil War, the North, what were the winners?
Just walk around Atlanta today wearing a shirt that says Sherman was right and see how long you last before you get shot in the face.
Yeah.
10 blocks, maybe.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, you're offending, and that's something that, regardless of any divisiveness within that region, and there's a lot of discrimination and racial tension in the South, but man, all those motherfuckers are going to jump on your ass.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that sense of civic pride in states like Georgia, that runs deep.
Yeah.
You know, we have friends who went to University of Georgia and Georgia State and stuff like that, and I spent some time in Florida. You know, the parts where most of the people were also from New York originally, but I went to school in Tallahassee, Florida, Florida State. You know, go Seminoles. Speaking of a racially appropriate, sensitive stereotype of a mascot.
Yeah.
But
if you're not watching the video, John just did a ethnically sensitive chop just out of habit. So you know, our version of the Sieg Heil, but you know,
I remember, you know, being a stranger in a strange land in Tallahassee. I hid in plain sight as a Northern Yankee, and there's a lot of things that I'm going to admit that I said or did to kind of stay off the radar, and just, you know, when in Rome. And I wouldn't say that I ever participated in any racist or homophobic behavior, but I sure as hell didn't say anything against it when I knew in my heart, hey guys, what you're saying and doing is wrong, and I don't appreciate it. But not to knock the South, that happens where I grew up in New York City.
Boston's one of those racist cities in the country, and that's, you know, in the heart of secular liberaldom.
Right, and we've said it before. You know, the old adage escapes me. The only thing that evil needs to thrive is.
The only thing required for evil to thrive is for good men to do nothing.
Right, and I've definitely been guilty.
Well, but we're not good men, so let's not be too hard on ourselves.
Right. Yeah. Of course, it's all about expectations. And but that's definitely something that is difficult, and you know, maybe that's part of why it took until 2015 for marriage equality rights, is because not enough people who maybe believed in social equality and believed in change weren't vocal enough early on enough to do anything about it.
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting because, you know, everybody's fine with the status quo until the status quo affects their life. It's one of the things you're fighting with climate change. Like, you're starting to see extreme weather fluctuations show up and really fuck with people's lives.
But there's still winter, man.
But there's still
I got a snowball.
And more importantly, it's not affecting everyone.
Right.
You know, so Fargo is still cold, San Diego is still hot. So until something affects the majority of people, it's not going to be acted on by the majority of people. It's just how we are. The most effective stimulation for any kind of primate is negative stimulation.
Sure.
You get a banana, yeah, you like the banana, but you get the cattle prod to the butt, and whoa, like, you definitely don't do that again. So it basically requires that kind of familiarity, that kind of exposure, and that happened with the proliferation of out and proud gay people over the last, 30 years. It hasn't been that long since Stony Brook in New York, man, back where you're from. That was what, the 70s.
Yeah.
So in 40 years, and that was about the same time that civil rights were progressing for people of color.
And speaking of which, the President Obama, just this past Monday, or actually it was recorded Friday, on Marin's podcast WTF, he was talking about just after the Charleston shooting, he was talking about how there has been change, there has been improvement in civil rights, and just, overcoming discrimination, and he said the N-word, which I don't feel comfortable, nor do I feel I have a place saying, but he said it on the air.
Any black person should feel comfortable saying that.
Right.
If they don't want to say it, then that's fine. But if they want to, they're the only people who have the right to say it.
Right. I haven't done anything to earn the right to say it, and I'm not going to say it.
Yeah.
But he said it on the air.
You're not John Dolezal?
No, Dolomite. He said it in the context of it's not okay to walk down the street in the United States right now. Most places, some places it's still acceptable, but it's not okay to walk down the street and say the N-word and have people be okay with it. And that's a sign of progress.
Right, but like we talked about on the last episode, when it's not like the feelings go away, they just become subsumed under this era of political correctness, but then the actual damaging effects of you can't get a job, you can't get a loan, you can't get a grocery store in your neighborhood.
Right.
So effective institutionalized ghettos and segregation continue. That's much, much harder to combat because it's more insidious.
Yeah.
It's not like, hey boy, get off my porch. It's like, it's not, you can fight that pretty easily. There's this really good book called The Best of Enemies about when integration was forced upon, I believe it was in South Carolina back in 1971. The two people who ended up on the committee to try and get the integration through for the town peacefully was the Grand Cyclops of the local Ku Klux Klan and a deeply black single mother. And so they hated each other for some reason. And after 10 days of discussions, they ended up being friends, pushed it through. And he said, one of the great all-time moments, in front of 1,000 people, including the entire local Ku Klux Klan, and he held up his KKK ID card and said, if it takes me ripping this up for there to be better schools for our children, then I gladly do so. And he threw the pieces on the ground in front of the entire Ku Klux Klan. 1,000 people. The balls that took, and he was cut off from that organization and the people in his life who were in there for the rest of his life, and he and the woman were friends until he died. She delivered the eulogy at his funeral. That's the kind of balls it takes for these different inciting incidences for there to be progress. So you talk about the shootings in South Carolina. I loved that in Alabama they ordered the Confederate flag taken down. Yeah. They just did it. No fanfare, no press release, no nothing. It was some people just happened to notice. These workers came out, lowered the flag down, lowered the other flag down, because there's 3 different versions of the Confederate flag. They lowered them down and they took them away. And you're not going to see them again.
It was the burial at sea, so to speak.
Yeah, and I love that. I almost love it more that there's no fanfare, because it's tragic and disgusting that it takes this kind of senseless violence. Sure. Well, let's not say senseless. That's ridiculous. The guy was a racist and he shot people. It's very sensible from understanding how it took place. Right. But it's terrible that it takes that kind of tragedy to spur people to action. But I love that once it does affect people's lives, whether it's gay rights or civil rights or marriage equality, that the change happens, and it's usually not with the fanfare and people storming the lobby of the Supreme Court. It's just friends and neighbors doing something respectful for their other friends and neighbors who were affected.
And if you you're talking about looking at a map and looking at red and blue states and how most states are purple. If you look at just geographically, where are the largest concentrations of blue or liberal democratic political centers on the map?
The coasts.
The coasts and cities. Yeah. Cities, areas of population. And you can stipulate there are several reasons and any number of reasons that cities have a more liberal base. But I think the most important and the most pressing reason for that is because people are forced to live in proximity to one another. People are forced to know their white, black, Hispanic, gay, straight, poor, rich neighbors. And you are literally, in some cases, on top of each other. So you either have to get to know someone or become a hermit and never leave your apartment. Have you seen that documentary about the wolf boys, the boys in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, who their father, they were, oh my God, we got to review that one week. It's fantastic. There's 5 boys who basically remanded to a 4-bedroom public housing building by their father, who were let out once a year in Manhattan, once a year, and basically survived by watching and recreating some of their favorite movies like Reservoir Dogs and The Dark Knight. Really amazing thing. But off that topic, when you are forced to live around people who don't look like you, don't sound like you, are different than you, you're going to learn that change is okay. Change exists regardless. It exists.
The bridges don't collapse.
Right.
The walls don't come tumbling down. The world continues on.
It's easy to keep that mindset, that small town mindset, when you don't have your preconceived notions challenged. And like the single black mother and the KKK Grand Cyclops, if you get to know someone on a human level, if you sit down and just talk to someone, that overcomes so many fucking preconceived, racist, sexist, misogynistic, everything. It gives you an opportunity to realize that we are people and we're mostly alike. And
it's hard to hate somebody you truly know.
Yeah.
As part of a group. You can't say they when you know DeMarcus or you know John. Like, I know that person. They don't match up with these hate criteria, whatever it is on paper.
That's how all war happens, is a dehumanization of your enemies. That's why when we fought the Japanese, they weren't Japanese, they were Nips. When we fought the Germans, they were Krauts or Jerry. It's that systematic dehumanization that allows people to kill one another and not feel the weight of taking away that universe of a single person. It doesn't feel good when you know that you shot Bob. You shot that dirty Kraut. Yeah. I'm going to pick on Krauts because you're a dirty Kraut.
I understand. We deserve everything that's coming our way.
Right. So. Ich bin Leibe.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so it's overcoming that xenophobia. What it really comes down to is fear of the unknown, fear of the other. Them. And man, yeah, it's so much. It's that if getting to know your friends and neighbors and strangers, that's the opposite of politicking, because politics wants you to be gregarious only with your groups of people and to only believe in your ideology and to stay in that bubble. And getting out of that bubble is what's going to allow you to overcome those small-minded ideas and notions. And that's what I love more than anything about traveling. Whether it's Indonesia or Ireland or
Iran
South
or
America. I haven't gone there yet, but the thing that I learned from traveling is nothing fancy. It's just that everyone loves their family. Everyone wants to have a better life. People want food in their belly and entertainment at night. And yeah, we may speak different languages and we may have access to different things, different amounts of money. But ultimately, I'm sure when we actually admit to having connections or contact with aliens, if that's happened, or when the aliens from other countries do come down and there's some sort of first contact.
So you're talking about immigrants now?
No.
Aliens from other countries?
Space aliens.
From other planets,
right.
Galaxies,
right.
Whatever.
When there's first contact with aliens from outer space, which, they wouldn't be aliens. We'd be aliens to them. Mm-hmm. But when we have that first contact, what probably will happen is if they don't kill us all as the cockroaches we are as humanity, then we'll probably find out that they have the same hopes, dreams, and desires as we do.
Well, I mean, that's all pure conjecture. Yeah. It's the ultimate arrogance to think that if there's sentient lives from somewhere else, as there statistically most likely is, why would it be remotely similar to us? Why wouldn't they exist on a spectrum of radio waves or light or sound? Why would they even need to be corporeal?
Because, and again, it may be a carbon life form that doesn't have sentience, but they're not going to get here. A sentient life form, I believe, would probably evolve by the same natural laws we did, with a different set of genetic material. But there are those natural inherent laws of evolution that allow every species to have similarities.
Not necessarily. The only reason that we look like we do is because organisms crawled out of the oceans. If there's no oceans, if there's nothing to crawl out of, it's going to be an aquatic life form.
Yeah, of course.
You have, sentient dolphins somewhere, sentient whales, sentient piles of shit. It doesn't matter what our view of it is. It's statistically unlikely that they would resemble us in any way.
There's not going to be humanoids, I don't think, because again, it's what we evolved from. We have liquid eyeballs because we came from fish, and we'll never have as good a vision as a shark would because their eyeballs have developed and evolved in that natural landscape, whereas we have eyeballs that dry out because they were never meant to be on land out of water.
I was looking at some of those hard sci-fi where they've built a true world. It's here's why things are and why things look the way they are. And a lot of that, you could see that okay, well, this is a volcanic planet, and so it can't sustain life, but these things are armored rocks, because that's what it takes to survive the constant lava flows. So I mean, we can talk about that all day, but it circles back around to taking down a Confederate flag and electing a black president twice does not cure racism. Right. But these are important steps. Legalizing marriage equality does not cure homophobia, but it is an important step.
Sure.
So the fact that the social changes seem to be kind of snowballing and happening faster and faster and faster. Not nearly as fast as anybody would like. Not fast enough for your sister's friend in New York. Not fast enough.
There's no 18th prize
for the men,
marriage equality.
For the men and women who died of AIDS over the last 35 years and will continue to die.
Yeah.
But steps are finally being taken, and it's, let's be honest, as a result of young people. You know, it's just familiarity with the previously unknown and the previously feared. It used to be women. Oh my God, terrifying. Okay, not so terrifying. It used to be black people. Okay, not so terrifying. It used to be gay people. Okay, not so terrifying. But it's going to see what we continue to demonize as a society, because eventually it's just, what do we have to be worried about? We're the apex predator of this planet. We have no natural predators except each other. Yeah. So eventually, I mean, the problem is going to be when we figure out that we should all just love each other, is that's the day that we run out of food and the planet dies because there's no more war and nobody dies of anything.
And I mean, I truly believe that love is the opposite of fear. And if you love something, it's hard to fear it.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
if you know something, it's easy to love it. Right. And yeah, I mean, nothing disinfects like sunlight, as the old expression goes. Right. It's like, oh, it's not some dirty group of immigrants that's taking all my jobs. Like that's Jesus. He goes to the same church that I do. Right. His kids go to the same school. Like he's not destroying the country. He's just here working like I am.
So what you're saying is there may be a day where people who don't believe in a bearded man up in the sky pulling all the marionette strings, atheists one day may be accepted as not this disgusting aberration, but actually may be accepted in society.
Let's not be ridiculous. That day will never come. We'll always be trusted just above pedophiles. But no, I love looking back on it. Like one of the most hilarious, grotesque reads to come out of the 90s was obviously Jerry Springer's TV show. But the way that he ended every single episode, every single episode for hundreds and hundreds of episodes, until next time, be good to yourself and each other. What a beautiful benediction. Yeah. Good night and good luck. Fuck that. Sorry, Moro, whatever your name was.
Be sure to spay your cats and your dogs.
Be good to yourselves and each other. Like what a beautifully simple benediction.
Yeah.
Honestly, that should be the global religion. Be good to yourselves and each other.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all you need.
And I
call it the Quran, call it Richard Dawkins, call it the Bible, call it the Book of Mormon, call it the Torah, call it whatever you want, but until just be good to yourselves and each other.
Yeah, and I don't believe in a little man sitting out pulling strings, but I believe that we all as human beings are connected in some way, and that the fact that we're here is an amazing part of the universe. And I mean, I think love is a universal thing that if we tap into, it will vastly improve the quality of our lives and the lives of the people we know.
Yeah, that being said, we still need to cull at least 30% of the people that we have on this planet, because I need enough bacon to see me through my time on this mortal coil. All right. I don't care if anybody else has enough water. I don't care if anybody else has enough arable land. If they have quality air to breathe, Mexico City can dissolve into the ocean. Europe can drift away into the sun. It's about me and this country having what we need to survive. So whether you're black or brown or straight or gay or poor or rich, as long as we can keep the majority of the resources for this country, I'll be happy. And with that, I think we come to the end of another episode of Black Mountain Radio. So until next time, sharing means do it America's way, and compromise means, or sharing means you give it to America, and compromise means we do it America's way. So the rest of you, go fuck yourselves.